Good morning, everyone. We are all here today to speak for victims of crime and their families and call on the members of the Nebraska legislature to do the same. Senators must put victims before criminals. They must put public safety first and vote no on bills that put our citizens at risk. Governor Ricketts and Attorney General Peterson, welcome to Omaha. Also here today is Police Chief Todd Schmatter, Douglas County Attorney Don Klein, Sarpy County Attorney Lee Polikoff, Douglas County Sheriff Tim Dunning, and Sarpy County Sheriff Jeff Davis. Representing the Omaha Police Officers Association is Dennis Sexton, and Brian Peterson is with the State Troopers Association of Nebraska. And John Francavella is a member of the Fraternal Order of the Police. First, Governor Ricketts. Governor?
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mayor. Attorney General, welcome. Thanks for coming here as well, and members of law enforcement. I appreciate you being here today. As the Mayor said, we're here to talk about public safety. It's certainly a conversation we've been having a lot of over the last few years here in Nebraska. From things such as the errors that led to the release of Nico Jenkins, to more recently Senator Chambers' incendiary comments. And I applaud the Nebraska legislature for tackling these important and tough issues. For instance, they've been working with the Council of State Governments, and I support LB 605, which I think brings important reforms. I support it in its clean version and the original version. However, yesterday, Senator Chambers introduced a bill that would remove mandatory minimum sentences for certain classes of crimes. And these crimes include such things as gun crimes, sexual crimes, child pornography, distributing drugs on schools grounds. We're talking about people who are not petty thieves. And this is the wrong direction that we need to go for public safety. Now, I know there's problems in corrections. We all know that. And in fact, that's why, with the help of members of the community, I did a national job search to find Director Frakes. And he's going to be working to address these issues that we have in our corrections system. We're going to fix them. But now is not the time to rush to ease the sentences on these people who are criminals, who are doing damage to our public safety. Another bill that's going to be debated today is about Ernie Chambers' perennial attempt to repeal the death penalty. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there right now, and this is a chance to set the record straight. Some people have said the death penalty is too expensive. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the fiscal note that is attached to this bill, there is no cost savings for it. Absolutely none. And if you are going to be a county attorney prosecuting crimes such as the bank robbery we had in Norfolk, you're going to incur additional expenses regardless of what the crime is or what the sentencing is going to end up being. And it is just not something where we are going to save money here at the state or at the counties. And frankly, I don't understand why someone like Raymond Mata, who kidnapped, murdered, and then dismembered a 3-year-old little boy, should have the luxury of living on taxpayer dollars at $50,000 a year. These are the kind of people we're talking about when we're talking about the death penalty. Now, some people have said that we don't need a death penalty to protect public safety. And again, we've got some prosecutors here to tell you today about how they use the death penalty to get stronger sentences on life sentences. And for those of you who believe that we can take care of this with life sentences, I would offer you the example of Lottie Dietrich. Lottie Dietrich was sentenced to a life sentence, served 40 years, and then was pardoned. And within a year and a half of getting pardoned, he was out molesting a 12-year-old little girl. We need the death penalty to help protect the public safety. A lot of folks have argued that the death penalty is something that we don't need from the standpoint of all these issues. It's just not true. The death penalty is important to protecting the public safety. And I will veto any attempt to change that. And this is one of the traditions that we have here in Nebraska, that the people are the second house in our legislature. We have a unicameral system. And the members of our unicameral need to hear from the people in the state. If you believe that the death penalty is important, if you believe that protecting the public safety from these violent criminals is important, you have to be able to step up and talk to our senators right now. And one final point. People have said we don't have a protocol to be able to execute people right now. Again, this is a management problem. This is why we've hired Director Frakes, and we will fix this. Just like all the other problems in corrections, we will fix this. So please, I ask Nebraskans, contact your state senators, let them know how you feel about this. You are the second house. And with that, I'd like to introduce Attorney General Doug Peterson. He's going to talk about it from the Attorney General standpoint. Mr. Attorney General?
Thank you, Governor. And thank you, Mayor Stothard, for having this important press conference. I want to talk, yesterday, the Legislative Judicial Committee came out and they approved 8-0 to come out of committee, LB 483. And I want to talk about that real briefly because I think that gives you a good glimpse of our concern or our frustration. And when I say our, I'm talking about the Attorney General's office and the County Attorneys Association. 483 is really the 1/3 rule. And if you want to know how the 1/3 rule would work, look at what happened this week with the sentencing of Mr. Lloyd in Douglas County. In that particular case, it was a second-degree murder case, and he was sentenced 30 to 35 years. If you apply the 1/3 rule, it would require that judge, if he was going to do a maximum sentence of 35, the minimum would have to be 1/3 of that, or just under 12 years. That's significant because currently with that 30-year minimum, that individual would not, for second-degree murder, would not be eligible to be considered for parole until 15 years of serving time. That's assuming that he had good time up to that point. If you accept the 1/3 rule, which the Judiciary Committee is proposing, he would be, at a minimum on that sentence, he would be just under 12 years, and he would be eligible for parole just under 6 years. We have talked and talked to this Judiciary Committee and asked them to pull that 1/3 rule out of there. Frankly, we've had a hard time of having a seat at the table. In fact, the prosecutors in the Attorney General's office have been referred to as Disney World. Our concern is that rules such as LB 483, the 1/3 rule, is not in the best interest of public safety. And the thing that troubles us the most, it's being represented that the 1/3 rule was recommended by the CSG report. The 1/3 rule, in fact, the senator referenced that it's in the report. It is not in the final CSG report. The 1/3 rule is not a proposal to reduce prison overcrowding. Where does that come from? I think that comes from the playbook of the ACLU Nebraska plan. That does not come from the CSG report. And our concern is if it comes from the ACLU playbook, that the playbook is not going to prioritize public safety. The ACLU is a fine organization, but their priority is prisoner rights, not public safety. Our concern is, as prosecutors, we want a seat at the table to say what we think is best in public safety. And we've been told several times that they would take the 1/3 rule out of the legislation. Not only have they not taken it out, but now they've brought it back to the floor as a separate bill. That's a concern, and that's why we, as prosecutors, understand that the first priority for Nebraskans is public safety, not prisoner rights. And we don't think the 1/3 rule really has any effect, significant effect, on the issue of overcrowding. I use that as an example because I think there's some real frustration when you're referred to as Disney World by a senator on the floor. It seems as if the prosecutors don't have a seat at the table. And we're asking that the public make it known to their state senators that public safety should be the #1 priority in this issue. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the Governor, Attorney General, the Mayor, and my esteemed colleagues behind me. I hope that this collective forum that we have today has some impact on the legislature as they move forward with the passage of some bills. I realize that we have a prison overcrowding issue, and I realize there's pressure to resolve it. But under no circumstances should that pressure allow public safety to be triaged #2 or #3 on the priority list. It's always got to remain #1. I was an appointed member of the Council of State Governments who has laid out a roadmap that's reasonable to reduce prison overcrowding without unduly affecting public safety. LB 173 is damaging on its surface, needs to be tweaked. The 1/3 sentencing rule flat out scares me as Chief of Police of the City of Omaha. The Omaha Police Department has dedicated ourselves to reducing violent crime. We have dedicated ourselves to making partners with the community who share a common goal to reducing violent crime in our city of Omaha, which predominantly centers around gang and gun violence. LB 173 significantly hampers those efforts. And I just want to remind everybody, this is a criminal justice system and only works when police courts and corrections are in unison. If the legislature goes too far with their reach with bills, it throws that system out of alignment, and it becomes very hard to police the city of Omaha if that does occur. I want to introduce Douglas County Attorney Don Klein.
Good morning. I want to also thank the mayor, Governor Ricketts, Attorney General Peterson for being here today. We also have the Lancaster County Attorney here, Joe Kelly, is also present in our group. When I see what's happening in Lincoln from a legislative perspective and the importance that everything that's being done and the impact it's going to have on the criminal justice system, it concerns me very much. What the legislature is doing is putting citizens of the state of Nebraska in jeopardy with some of the actions that they intend to take or make with regard to some of the legislation they're trying to pass. It's as simple as that. LB 173 takes away all mandatory minimums, or the purpose is to start to take away all mandatory minimums. We were down there as an association, the Nebraska County Attorneys Association, saying we need that bill, we need that legislation the way it is. We have sent a message with the chief, the Department of Justice, that if you do a gun crime, you're going to do time. And that's a very important message. If you're a felon and you have a gun, you're going to do time. This takes away that mandatory minimum sentence on those kinds of crimes. We've had billboards that we put up in conjunction with that in the city of Omaha about that message that we want to make sure people understand. And this takes that away from us. And it makes no sense to me if we have a problem that we need prison reform to start changing these sentences for the worst of the worst type of criminals and behavior that we have within the system. And that's what this does, taking away those mandatory minimums that we need from a law enforcement perspective to continue the trend that's ongoing right now, and that is that violent crime is going the right way. It's lessening. We've been doing a good job with putting those kinds of folks away who are the worst of the worst, and we need that help from the legislature and the people to have those mandatory minimums. The governor also spoke about the death penalty. I testified in judiciary this year on behalf of the Nebraska County Attorneys Association, and as is the Douglas County Attorney, that we need to have the ultimate punishment in certain unique cases that occur here in the state of Nebraska. We're not like some other states where we mete out or we're asking for the death penalty on an innumerable cases. It's a very unique punishment. It goes into those unique cases. I've had two. Both of them were cases where an individual raped and murdered children and had a criminal and violent history. And we need to protect people from those kinds of folks. And as the governor said, we don't need that person to be on the dole of the state for the rest of their life, being paid to live in the penitentiary. We need to protect society from those kinds of folks, and we need that punishment in those cases, those very unique cases where we have a layered process, where the prosecutor makes a determination of aggravating circumstances exist, the legislature determines what those aggravating circumstances are, a jury hears those aggravating circumstances, we have to prove those beyond a reasonable doubt. Then a three-judge panel weighs those aggravating circumstances versus any mitigating circumstances the defense would present, and they have to vote unanimously. So it's a very layered, protected process, very unique, and it works. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions later, but I'd like to introduce our Douglas County Sheriff, Tim Dunning.
Morning. I'm here today not only as the Douglas County Sheriff, but also representing the Nebraska Sheriff's Association and our 93 sheriffs. Just to echo what's been said before, but to maybe give you some examples. When we talk about the habitual criminal statute, many or some of you may recall David Burdett, who victimized our community in the 1980s. His victims were women that were on the some magazines, most beautiful women of Omaha, the top 8 or 10 or whatever it happened to be. Second, he goes to prison, gets out. Second time around, in the late 1990s, his list was the widows that he could find in the obituary page of the newspaper. Had we not convicted that guy of habitual criminal, and under the current statute, he'd be out today, and maybe it'd be female reporters this time. I mean, who knows what his next victim was going to be, but thankfully, Don's office was able to convict that guy, get a habitual criminal conviction, and he's no longer with us. With regards to the death penalty, John Jubert's not here with us today. He's not sharing my air, and I'm very thankful for that, because there's no other kid that can possibly ever be victimized by that horrible killer. Violent criminals need to be treated differently. We're not, I heard a senator yesterday on TV talking about we can't keep putting nonviolent criminals in jail, and I probably share somewhat of that thought, but violent criminals need to be treated differently. Sexual predators need to be treated differently. There's a significant population in the sexual predator population that are just not curable, and we need to face the fact. I think the legislature is trying to attack the problem with post-incarceration supervision, and I applaud that move, and I think that's something that will help maybe reduce recidivism in the future. I ask the legislature to stand for public safety, don't stand against us. Thank you.
Here in Omaha, my greatest responsibility is public safety. Legislative Bill 173 would reduce penalties for certain crimes involving drugs and guns. It would also decrease the penalties for being a habitual criminal. Ironically, these are the crimes violent gang members are most often arrested and charged for. LB 173, sponsored by Senator Ernie Chambers, and right now 27 other senators agree that reducing these penalties is a good idea. These senators are not taking our gang problem seriously. Their vote support this bill shows more concern for the criminal than the victim. The bill is counterproductive to our police department's ambitious and ongoing efforts to reduce violent crime. The citizens of Omaha and the police officers who protect them must not feel that their legislature is turning a blind eye at this problem. The Judiciary Committee advanced LB 173 in part because prison overcrowding is an acute problem. However, senators should not reform our prison system at the expense of public safety. I also join Governor Ricketts in opposing LB 268. The death penalty should not be repealed. We only have to remember names like John Jubert, Harold Walkin' Willie Otay, and Nico Jenkins, who terrorized our city. And that's some of the examples of where the death penalty absolutely is warranted. Citizens expect their elected leaders to make thoughtful, responsible, and sound decisions. Repealing the death penalty and reducing sentences are neither thoughtful, responsible, or sound. I ask all senators, especially those representing the city of Omaha, to vote no on these bills. With that, I will entertain any questions that you have. Governor, you want to step forward?
What do we do about the overcrowding problem?
This is why, again, with the help of the community, we did a national job search to bring in somebody to help reform corrections. We need a culture change there. We need to restore the public trust, and we need to have a culture of accountability and excellence. And that is what Scott Frakes is doing right now. You've seen already he's taken steps to, for instance, end a furlough program that he thought was too risky. We announced last week about the software program we're putting in place to get rid of some of the manual errors that were happening with the sentence calculation. Those are just some of the steps he's taking to help reform it. There's not going to be quick fixes. We got a lot of work to do. And Director Frakes needs times to put those things in place, but we are going to address this. And that's what the real key is. What you're talking about, the problems we have in our correction system are management problems. What we need to do is allow the management to start fixing those and not try to make public safety an issue here by, say, for instance, ending mandatory minimum sentences or getting rid of the death penalty.
Do we need a new prison? Another one?
We right now, Director Frakes is going to be working to analyze what sort of resources we need in corrections, and he will be coming back with a plan on how we address these issues. And certainly I think there's a lot of work we can do based upon our early analysis. I think there's a lot of things we can do before we have to think about building a prison.
Governor, it's my understanding you can't even get the drugs needed anymore for an execution. They don't even manufacture them anymore. If you can't get the drugs, what's the point of having the death penalty? Or do we need to change the manner in which we execute?
You know what, as I said before, the ability to actually execute somebody is a management problem. We will fix this. So this is something, again, we know there's a lot of problems in corrections. This is one of the issues we've had in corrections. This is one of the issues that the Attorney General and Director Frakes and I have already sat down to talk about how we're going to address, and we will fix this problem.
With all due respect, Governor, software and ending the furlough program isn't going to do anything about prison overcrowding. So if you won't build a new prison, then what would you do?
Well, again, you know, the typical government solution is just to jump in without thinking, without looking, and start doing things. What you really want to do is take a step back, analyze where we've been going wrong, and come back with a plan. And that's what we're going to do. So we need to give Director Frakes the opportunity to do the analysis, come back with a plan. When he comes back with that plan, then would be the appropriate time to say, I like it or I don't like it, and say, I like this aspect or I criticize this aspect. But right now, it is absolutely way too premature for us to start running about, you know, allowing, these are dangerous people. When we're talking about some of the sentences we talked about before, this mandatory minimum sentence or the death penalty, these are dangerous people. We ought not to be sacrificing public safety without having even done the analysis of what we need to do in our correction system. I'm confident in Director Frakes. We've got a very good person there. He's going to need to strengthen his management team, but we are going to fix these problems.
But would a new prison solve the problem? We just have another building, another prison to house all these people?
I don't believe building a new prison at this point is going to solve any problems. I think we've got a lot of structural things we have to do differently. Based upon my few months here as governor, I know there's lots of opportunities for us all across state government to do a better job of servicing the people and bringing our costs down, just like we do in the private sector, and the correction system is no different.
You mentioned Michael Logan. The young man obviously had mental health issues before the murder occurred. We're now going to put him in prison for, 15 to 17 years or whatever, and then let him back out without any mental health help. Is there anything that's going to be done once the prisoners are in there to help them not reoffend once they get out?
One of the things I've told Director Frakes is that with very few exceptions, everybody who enters our correction system will someday be leaving our correction system, and the plan for how they leave needs to start the day they arrive. And so that's going to be one of his goals as he goes about this corrections reform. And mental health clearly is one of the things he's going to be looking at. But again, we need to give Director Frakes the opportunity to actually do the analysis and to come back with a plan. The proper time to start making the criticisms is after we come back with a plan.
Do you have a time frame for when you can expect to see this plan on your desk?
Director Frakes is still doing the analysis right now. We hope to have some preliminary ideas by this fall.
When you talk about wanting a seat at the table, I mean, what kind of seat are you looking at? You have hearings, you've been out in the lobby.
Well, let me tell you, having hearings and being out in the lobby is not enough. These prosecutors in our office, we prosecute felony cases across the state. So every day our prosecutors are looking into the face of those who are charged, and we're also dealing with victims. I'd have to say we have the most qualified experience to address issues like habitual criminals, about the 1/3 rule. Yet when we went to talk at the hearings, our input was not incorporated by the Judiciary Committee. When we tried to talk with members of the Judiciary Committee and their legal counsel, our input was not incorporated in any of the bills. And just as recently as this week, when they went on the floor to debate 605, they indicated that they were going to pull out the 1/3 rule. And then lo and behold, now they come back in the Judiciary on an 8-0 vote, bring the 1/3 rule back out yesterday afternoon. And when I say it's the ACLU Nebraska playbook, that's where that 1/3 rule comes from. And we've told them time and time again that that hampers our ability with dangerous criminals. And that input, I mean, the fact that the derogatory comment was made about prosecutors on the floor is troubling to me, because it doesn't seem to indicate that they really want our input. They've mocked our input. Yet these are the guys who are in there doing it day in and day out for public safety, but yet we're mocked on the floor of the legislature. And we're saying that the 1/3 rule is a problem. It makes it way too simple or way too early for some really dangerous criminals to be up for parole. And one way, and inevitably, there are going to be some people who are released on parole and they're going to reoffend. And so that's what I mean.
One of the points on the good time law that they talk about in getting rid of minimum sentencing standards is that it would give judges more discretion. Is that a good thing?
Well, I think overall this package is taking away more of the judge's discretion and prosecutor discretion, especially 173. It is not a good thing that when you have not a one-time felon, not a two-time felon, but a person who's convicted their third time, and let's say it's a second-degree child sexual assault, most prosecutors, when they have their third conviction of a felon, probably have a pretty good track record that this criminal is not respecting the law. And we should be able to go to the court and seek, and the judge should have the ability or discretion to grant an enhanced sentence against that individual with a 10-year minimum.
Now, the analogy of using the child sexual assault is very good and nice photo op.
No. It's the reality of that law. It's the reality of what they're proposing. It's not a photo op. It's second and third degree child sexual assault being taken out.
Sir, what I'm saying is though, is that there are a lot of other felons who may have had nonviolent crimes that are locked up for doing nonviolent crimes. Is that right to keep them out? I mean, or to keep them locked up like that?
I would tell you that these prosecutors have a much better idea on what individuals deserved enhanced sentencing than a Nebraska state senator. And they have to use their discretion, and the court has to use their discretion. But to take 173 and eliminate some very serious violent crimes from even being considered, that's a really bad idea for public safety.
With the emphasis on parole and probation, has the legislature addressed building the infrastructure to be able to handle the increase of criminals on the street?
You know, one of the things in the CSG report was to take Class 3 and Class 4 felons and get them out of the system more towards probationary supervision. Now, frankly, I believe the prosecutors generally agree that that's good policy. I think with regards to the threats caused by those Class 2 felons and Class 1 felons, the cost incurred by that is important for public safety. Now, whether or not the Class 3, Class 4, and the impact that that will have on the probation system, I think the senators are generally aware that that is going to put an additional burden on our probation system. But I think the more important question is that they understand that Class 1, Class 2 felons are serious and that we need to be able to keep them within the system, not released on the streets.
The ACLU, or the legislature, has said these bills address the prison overcrowding problem. The ACLU is threatening a lawsuit now, so what's your response to that? How do you address those problems?
Well, I think if you look at the CSG report, and if the senators stayed limited to that report, I think they have the opportunity to bring those numbers down to a reasonable one in which I think the state of Nebraska would be able to defend that. Our big concern is they're going outside the report. You can't find in the CSG report anything about 1/3 sentencing. You can't find in the CSG report 173. And that's why we're so concerned. Why did you go outside of that report? The only thing I can tell you is that's from the ACLU playbook. That's not from the CSG report.
Other questions?
Yeah, how do they plan on measuring success? How are they gonna decide whether or not this reform is working?
So one of the things we're doing across every agency is putting those metrics in place. So one of the things when I stepped into office, I found that just some of the basic things you would take for granted in the private sector weren't in place. And those measurements you're talking about how we determine success in every agency are not there. And so I've hired a chief operating officer for the state to help us put those measurements in place, to help streamline processes across all of agencies. Corrections is one of those agencies that will be working to develop those metrics to determine how well Director Frakes is doing his job. So I absolutely understand the direction you're going. We're going to put that in place, but we're really starting at ground zero. We don't have anything in place right now, so we've got to put those things in place. And for instance, there weren't even job descriptions for the people that report to the governor. we had to actually have the people in those jobs write their job descriptions when I got to office. So we've got a lot of work to do along those lines, but putting those private sector type metrics in place is one of the things that we're going to do.
If the plan comes back and recommends building a new prison, are you willing to spend the money to do that?
One step at a time. Let's get Director Frakes the opportunity to be able to come back and put his plan in place. I'll work with him, and then we'll take it from there.
Is a new prison at least on the table for discussion?
One step at a time. Let's give Director Frakes the opportunity to put his come back with his plan, and then we can talk about it then.
No offense, sir, but that was a yes or no question.
I'm not giving you a yes or no answer. We're going to start with it. We're going to start at the beginning. We need to do the analysis first. We'll come back, and then we'll look at the plan, and then we'll talk about it at that time.
The questions? Thank you all, and thank all of you.
Great. Thank you all, folks, for coming out here this morning. We appreciate it very much.